And we're back, Stripe Show podcast. It's Masters Week. Hope you enjoyed the Monday edition there with Taylor Zarzer as we recap the Valero Texas Open. Now we lob it ahead here to Augusta National. Forecast looking pretty good, mid-80s, maybe a little bit of rain coming up. And I was sitting there watching Bryson DeChambeau hit drivers on Monday at Augusta. And there's Vijay Singh standing there watching with a big old smile on his face as Bryson is just ripping driver after driver. It looked like Kyle Berkshire in the long drive contest doing some speed training. So I just got to thinking, I'm writing these questions down, all these things going through my mind as Bryson does. Gets me thinking. Chris Como gets me thinking. And I was like, let's bring in a guy that probably knows the answers to these questions because I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. And that's Dr. Sasha Mckenzie, who joins us from Canada. How you doing, Doc?
Doing great, Travis. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. You're the professor, Department of Human Kinetics, St. Francis Xavier University up there in Nova Scotia, Canada. I've got to ask you, is the Masters as big in Canada as it is in the United States?
Yeah, as big, maybe bigger, I guess.
Okay.
Mike Weir, if it wasn't already huge when he won, certainly brought it to the forefront. But no, the Masters, I think, is big all over the world.
It's the one now, isn't it? When I was younger, it felt like the U.S. Open was the one. And now the U.S. Open kind of took a dip, and now the Masters has just done such a terrific job of moving into that premier, the one you can't miss major championship. And it's going to be a different golf course this year than it was just 6 months ago. We're looking at fast, firm conditions. And I can't even imagine how far some of the drives are going to go here with Bryson DeChambeau. I know you are good friends with Chris Como. You guys have done a lot of great stuff for the game of golf. I've learned a lot from you guys. And I'm just curious, when you look at Bryson now and you look at this transformation and you watch his golf swing now versus, say, a year or two ago, what are a couple things that stand out to you that you're really liking that's leading to this big time increase in club head speed and net distance down the fairway?
I like his confidence to bring a higher level of effort to the tee. I think that holds back a lot of tour players. Now he's gotten comfortable because of all the practice he's done, but and if we're going to compare, to his say his swing 2-3 years ago, that bringing a higher level of effort and also the transition, his transition's a lot more dynamic than it was. A lot of separation between the lower and upper body. He's getting big stretches. He might have a better transition than a lot of long drive guys, to be honest.
And the stretch between lower and upper, which allows you to swing it faster, but kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So all the power in the golf swing comes from our body's muscles. And we have this, point in the swing at the top where the club's not moving. So we're at zero speed, and most of the body parts aren't moving very fast either. So the force in those muscles is kind of transitioning from making a backswing direction. Now we got to turn off those muscles and turn on the downswing muscles. It's advantageous to have those muscles producing really high forces over that short period of the downswing, that 0.25 seconds. So it's nice to be able to have those muscles already producing high forces before the downswing starts. If we can have a dynamic transition where the more what I would call the more distal or more proximal segments get moving in the downswing first, that gives us a chance to develop high forces in the muscles that cross between those segments. So, for example, with Bryson's obliques are amazing. Those muscles that stretch from the pelvis up across the torso. So when he gets that lower body transitioning in the downswing, that allows those muscles in the torso that cross the torso, the obliques, to get to a really high level of force before they start to pull the torso around.
Okay.
A really simple example is that I use with students is flicking someone's nose. So if I was to take my finger and say, all right, we're going to have a nose flicking contest, Travis, and I'm going to start from here and try to flick your nose without pinning my finger. right? So that would not really hurt, right? And that's because I'm starting this motion, my finger moving forward with zero force in those forearm muscles that are controlling my finger, right? They're at zero level of force as I go forward. If I pin my finger against my thumb, now what I'm doing now is I've cranked up the level of force in those muscles that's going to snap that finger forward. So what I can do now is really get a lot of speed. Mm-hmm. So the dynamic transition, moving those proximal segments first, allows those muscles to reach higher level of forces. It's the same reason why we do a counter movement before we jump. We go down before we jump up.
Right. Talk about Bryson's backswing. I see, is it fair to say that he's unweighting the lead foot more? You see the left heel coming up. There's more pressure moving into the trail side. And then from there, the downswing, as you're describing, takes place.
Yes. I think for sure he probably stayed a little bit more left 2 or 3 years ago. The more we can get a separation between what's called the center of pressure, that's the average spot of the vertical force from the ground. So it's what the average population would consider a weight shift. So when I feel what I feel under my feet as I go back and forth is really where my center of pressure is. The more force I feel under one foot relative to the other tells me where my center of pressure is. The more separation we can get between the center of pressure and my mass, the more potential there is to add speed into the system. So, you can get more speed if you have two legs on the ground because you're able to shift your pressure around relative to your mass. If you swing with one leg on the ground, you can't get that separation. That's going to inhibit that speed. So he's certainly lifting that lead heel. Lifting the lead heel is a sign that you've shifted your pressure to the trail side, and it's an advantage to try and get more club head speed for sure.
I call that drill the Humpty Dumpty. Kind of back and forth, and yeah.
Yeah, I saw some kids. Kyle Berkshire does it. We saw some kids at the drive, chip, and putt on Sunday doing. Awesome. Actually looked exactly like Kyle Berkshire.
So good. Yeah. I loved it when that kid did that. Lydia Ko put it in play 3 weeks ago. I texted Sean Foley and I was like, "That's the coolest thing I've seen in a long time." Was her doing that right in the middle of the tournament and busted it right down the middle. It was awesome.
It's like a waggle, but with your feet, with your center of pressure.
I think we're coming to a time where you're going to see people playing golf like that off the tee.
Yeah.
I think it's getting there.
There's the minds. I think maybe a mindset that Bryson had 2 or 3 years ago when his swing was a little more less dynamic. We'll say less movement. Was if I minimize the moving parts, then I can be more consistent. My perspective has always been that, we're already at such the extreme of moving parts in the golf swing, right? We've got contact is so precise and we've got body parts moving all over the place that really, if you do something that's going to add a little bit more club head speed, it's probably not too concerning that it might increase your dispersion or your ability to find contact that little bit. And he's showing that. I mean, he hits the ball as straight as anybody. He's almost a full standard deviation ahead of a lot of the guys on tour in terms of club head speed.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is something to watch. I can't wait to watch it this weekend. And just this whole thing, how it evolves. We're going to see more and more of this Kyle Berkshire Humpty Dumpty, I think, at the professional level with the driver where it makes sense. Let me pivot now to some players here in a hot topic that we hear a lot about, which is kind of the changing of knee flex, and particularly in the backswing. So for a right-handed golfer, that would be my right knee. I've always said to people, if I had to go back and be a young player again, I would do two things different. I would turn my right hip way more than I used to. I mean, way more. Because I used to not turn my hips, and just turn my torso and my thoracic. Number two is I would get my left wrist into flexion way sooner in the swing. So those are the two things, knowing what I know now, that I would do. Let's talk about the right knee. I look at DJ, I look at Spieth, there's others. Those are two good examples. That right leg is straightening out to the eye, right? If you're looking from the target line of view, you can see a window open up between the knees because of that changing of knee flex. Then you go to the other side, you see a Jason Day, you see a Brooks Koepka, who's long. His right knee stays flexed. You're not going to see that window opening up. Jason Day's knee perhaps is starting to straighten a little bit now. I don't know, but it has been predominantly flexed. When you see the difference in those two, one straightening, the other not, what comes to mind as far as, is there an advantage or disadvantage to either one? And then what might we see on the downswing? What do you think about when you see the difference? Very different to me in those two knee actions in the backswing.
Yeah. From a club head speed perspective, the bigger the arc you can get your hands to travel on, the more potential for speed. Call that hand path length. So the higher you can get your hands in the backswing, the more potential for speed. One of the segments that allows that is pelvis rotation. You're rotating your hips. If you keep the trail leg flexed, that's really going to limit your amount of pelvis rotation. So then you won't be able to move your hands through a range of motion that's as big as you could if you freed up that trail knee flex. I think that some golfers feel more control if they keep that trail knee flex. Historically, it's very interesting to trace where that came from. I look at all the best golfers in the past. I shouldn't say all, but pretty much everyone that I can think of, like a Jack Nicklaus, a Tom Watson, Johnny Miller, when they were playing with tiny driver heads. I don't see any of them really maintaining that flex in the trail knee, big, long, flowing swings.
Right.
And I think the concept of this, I don't know if the viewers are familiar with it, but X Factor stretch. It was Jim McLean, I think, made it pretty popular. Yeah. And I don't know if he would tell you to keep the trail knee flexed. I think maybe that's where people took it themselves. So the idea was, hey, we're going to get more stretch between the hips and the upper body if I don't allow those hips to rotate. I just read some old Michelle Wee tips in Golf Digest or Golf Magazine, and she was talking about maintaining trail knee flex and allowing there to be that stretch. And the thought was that will add speed getting that stretch. But you can still allow that right knee to flex, still get a ton of pelvis rotation, hip rotation in the backswing, like a Jordan Spieth, and still get that stretch. Yeah. Right. It just means that you're going to rotate the torso more. Right. It's the relative rotation between the torso and the hips, or the upper body and the lower body. So I don't think you're going to get more speed by limiting the pelvis rotation by keeping the trail knee flexed. Right. I don't think that's the case at all. You might feel more comfortable. You might feel more accurate. It's probably going to put a little more stress on the lower back. If you're trying to still get your hands to the same position, if you're trying to still get the same amount of rotation in the upper body, that needs to come from somewhere. I like it to come from the pelvis. I like to see a little bit more movement there. And what muddies the water too, if you look at club head speed, is that everybody's got so much different potential. Bryson right now could keep his right knee completely flexed, have zero pelvis rotation, and still have 125 mile an hour club head speed. And if we didn't know what we know, with the fact that he just, Arnold Palmer, I think he hit 140 off the tee, we would say 125, that's crazy fast. He's doing that because he's keeping his trail knee flexed. Well, no, what happens if he loosens it up a bit? Well, now we're at 140. So I think for those that keep their trail knee flexed, it's probably because they feel like they'll have more control.
So it's interesting when I teach amateurs, right? And let's pare it down here a little bit to the amateurs. We can learn from tour players, but we're not gonna turn like a DJ and those kinds of things, right? But when I get in there and I'm wiring most players and I'm teaching them how to turn that right hip, because as we get older, we lose range, right? Everybody's kind of going in. The hips aren't turning. They're trying to turn their upper. Their spine kind of stays down in flexion, and the swing gets really short. And then we see these habits. So it's interesting as I kind of get them to turn that hip. Now the spine feels like, man, I kind of extend and almost like elongate a little bit, and now the range of motion just really increases for them. Their hand path, and they feel a little out of control. But the net effect, as they get comfortable with it and they look at it, they're like, wow, I don't think my backswing has ever been that long in that structure. I'm lengthening way more people out than I'm shortening it up. And I'm doing exactly what we're talking about here in this changing in knee flex. And then adding a little spine extension, which really blows people's mind to think that their spine goes back as they're turning on this inclination, but yet you show it to them and they're just like, wow, this is a game changer. And I think single-handedly could be one of the most important thing amateurs need to learn, because it kind of just, it lengthens them out and it gives them some longevity to the game.
100%. I do a lot of shoe testing, club testing in the lab. And the population that I draw from, a lot of those individuals are between the ages of 50 and 70. And, you know, as a kind of a, hey, thanks for coming in and allowing me to use you to, you know, as a lab rat. I'll say, hey, you know, I can give you some, you know, some tips. You got 5 minutes, hang around. And the number one thing I tell them to do a lot of the times is get that lead leg lifted, get that pelvis freed up. I track strokes gained. That's the number one metric that I use in the lab to say, hey, was this driver performing better than that driver with these shoes, better than those shoes for you? I do a little strokes gain calculation, and I'll quickly say, hey, you know, we got a little bit of time. Let's whack another 14 drives, and I'll compare these 14 to the last 14 you hit using strokes gained. And yeah, dispersion will increase a little bit, but if you're driving the ball, you know, a lot of these guys are hitting it 200 yards off the tee. That would be a good drive for them. And now they've gone up to 220, and maybe they got one or two more balls in the rough, but that extra distance is washing out that increased dispersion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's such an important factor. And there's a chain reaction to it, you know, as far as how the body then can work through the impact, which we'll touch on here a little bit, but I want to pivot to this wrist angle here in the lead wrist. I was at coach's camp the last time Andrew Rice had it in person. You were there. John Sinclair was there. I love listening to your guys' reporting on 3D and testing, because not all of us have all this stuff, as you know. It's but it's awesome that you guys share it and you're so open to sharing it. John Sinclair made a comment, and I thought it was really interesting, and I want to talk about this, and I think I heard it the right way. And that is, in his data that John Sinclair's down in Texas, you know, does a lot of data research, has a very robust database of tour players, and
probably maybe the best.
Yeah, maybe the best. Yeah, I agree. And the lead wrist, he was saying, look, no matter what the lead wrist condition is at the top, okay, let's say you're a lot extended, let's say you're slightly extended, let's say you're flexed a little bit, whatever. But whatever range it is at the top, no matter what, your DJ, your Spieth, your Day, your Mickelson, you know, I'm kind of just slowly extending. Webb Simpson, yeah. That no matter where you are in transition, best players in the world, that lead wrist, no matter where you are, is going to work more towards flexion in transition. Best players in the world.
Yeah, I think the only player that I've seen not do that, and I think John would agree, would be Hovland. So yes, outside of that, you're right. Yeah, 100%.
So it's interesting when you start getting in there and you start putting your hands on these students, you know, and you're like, okay, look, this is flexion and extension, you know, and then they're, you know, they're starting to feel that. And now all of a sudden, you know, the shaft's starting to pitch a little bit. The face is starting to get itself prepared a little bit more. And, you know, that's a game changer for the amateur player. And again, feels different, but that's a big statement. Every player, with the exception of Hovland, no matter, that wrist is taking on more. It is taking on more flexion. And yet I think the perception so much is pulling down, right? And as we pull, normally as we pull down, that lead wrist moves more into extension. Yeah. Which has a lot of pitfalls to it. Talk about some of the advantages that you see with this lead wrist getting into flexion early, and what that means to shaft face, and what a player can maybe just do more instinctively on the way through. Yeah, I think if anybody's YouTubing at home, if you look at John Rahm or Brooks Koepka from a down the line position, they have this really, so you get this idea of what lead wrist flexion is. They have these very distinct kind of moves where they flex, just so you have
a good visual of when this occurs in the golf swing. Those are two good guys to look at from a down the line perspective. I think it's, generally accepted that it helps square the face early. And I think if you look at DJ, it seems like his face is kind of, never, because he's so flexed. You call that, a really shut face. But it's kind of, it leaves the amateur who slices with a feeling that, okay, maybe I don't need to do this last minute panic flip to square. Hey, this is already, if I do a little bit of that lead wrist flexion in the downswing, that's kind of already starting to square the face a little bit. And that helps. It also can help position a little bit the center mass of the club to a different. It encourages more of a flatter kind of swing motion that can actually help square the face as well from a completely different mechanism. And I think that's what you see the guys like Brooks Koepka and John Rahm doing. I think it puts that shaft in a little flatter plane, makes it a little bit easier to deliver from the inside.
Yeah, and that in the COM center of the mass, that club kind of laying down just a little bit, kind of getting back behind, right? And then from there, just now the body's like, okay, I've got it prepared. Now instinctively, I can kind of rotate and hit it, and as you said, not feel the need to have to compensate. Because no matter what the pattern is, everybody figures it out.
Yeah.
Like they could have a ton of lead wrist extension or cupping. A lot of players feel that cupping and they kind of pull down and they really feel that. And then it's like, well, now the face is wide open. So like, if I don't change that, now I've got to come over the top, or I got to aim left, or I got to do something, or I got to stand the handle up and let it go. But they figure it out and they can get the ball around the green, and it suggests to some degree a certain level of play. It's like you can kind of say, all right, you look at that, here's kind of what you're going to see, and this is normally the level of play that I would see from that particular pattern. Now we know there's outliers. We know Mickelson carries that wrist down a little bit longer than most. Greatest set of hands probably to ever play the game. Leishman would be in that category. But you see guys, this is a very commonly thing worked on. Like Patrick Reed is trying to prepare that face earlier, coming down now, and he's doing it more in the right hand, Sasha, like bending the right hand back more. Is that something that you go to right wrist, right elbow, and bending that back to help flex out that lead wrist?
Yeah, I think in terms of face control, that the trail arm is probably going to be more dominant. If you're trying to hit a one-handed shot and really manipulate the face, it's going to be a lot easier to do it with the trail hand. That's one way to get a sense of, right, that trail hand is pretty important. So it makes a ton of sense to me to think, all right, I'm going to focus on what the trail hand is doing just as much as the lead. Yeah, especially for weaker grip players. Players who you can't see where my camera's at. It's kind of tough for me to demonstrate. I'm a lefty.
Yep.
But if I have a strong top hand grip, this doesn't apply so much. But if you're have a weak top hand, that ability to go into extension through impact is critical to developing club head speed. So if you're already extended as you come down, that's a way that we're not going to be able to get speed into the club. So it makes sense to be going into flexion so that now you're in a position where you can be extending through impact. If it's already extended, then you're kind of robbing yourself of a way to get speed into the club.
Yeah, because if you're carrying that down, that extension, what you see, it depends really. Like a higher handicap, obviously they're gonna kind of throw it out, and then they're gonna get that path working across them pretty excessively. And they'll either leave the face and drag it, and they pass left, face right. We've seen that. Or they'll, maybe kind of shut it down a little bit, and they don't have to aim as left quite as much. The better player will pull it down a little bit steep and from the inside, and then they'll stand that handle up and let it out, right, and they'll hit draws, and that's that better player. So in that pattern, although I'm exaggerating, is a little bit of Spieth of what you see him in his rehearsal swings right now. And you see him kind of taking it back a little deeper. The shaft's a little more stacked up. So now the shaft can lay down a bit earlier.
Yeah.
And he can rotate, and that handle doesn't feel the need to maybe want to elevate a little bit, where maybe in a subtle way, he was a bit steep, perhaps in transition, and then felt the need to stand it and let it go. And there's your hooks.
Certainly, 2019, 2020 for sure. 2016, I actually, was, in my opinion, a slightly different swing. It looked like he came a lot more from the inside, was a little more comfortable. I think he's found some different feels or different rehearsals to get back to that 2016 delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like Duffner's helped him, with that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Duffner's swing. It's so simple.
Yeah.
I love that there's the trail elbow stays on the side of the body. He gets up, he's got the shaft laid off, and he just turns. But it can be a bit limiting in terms of trying to generate club head speed. So, he could still play on tour for sure. But if you're trying to hit at 122, 123, get the club head speed up that high, getting that, trail arm off the side, getting the hands a bit higher is going to help a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a different game now, right? Duffner and those guys, they're kind of Mike Weir, Luke Donald, the time kind of passed them a little bit. You hate to say it, but it's such a distance era now. And the way these guys hit it, it's hard to keep up. But Duffner, yeah, I agree. I do like his swing. And I think you can see a little Duff in it, in the way he's, kind of doing his gyrations, but you can see, it's evident to me, like it's this feeling of, like you can see this early this way, and then get out of the way left and be more instinctive and rotate, which is really where I want to ask you next is, and I was talking with Jeff Smith, who works with Victor Hovland, who we mentioned. And I asked Jeff, I said, how do you teach rotation through impact? And he's like, I just try to get people in a position where they can just rotate and just have that freedom through impact. And yeah, there's some things that you can do to facilitate that, but I just kind of let it go and kind of frame it, and then let them rotate and be instinctive and, get the shaft in the face where they want it. Talk about the ground a little bit and how the feet are interacting from a rotational standpoint, and being able, Sasho, to really, open up, right? That's kind of the key buzzword, open up through impact. But the reality is there's got to be some good things happening before that for a player to instinctively just rotate in what looks like, in many ways, these guys, when they get it going, they look like they're trying to hit as hard as they can, because the shaft and the face are in such good positions, and they know that instinctively, and then they just get out of the way. But talk about the feet and interacting with the ground from a rotational standpoint.
Yeah, well, I certainly think that I've seen lots of players, I'm sure you have, especially athletic baseball players, who can almost rotate too much. They get too much what I would call angular momentum in the system, and the club just never catches up. So when we interact with the ground, one of the things we're trying to do is, the term that I would use is, we're trying to get angular momentum into the system. We're trying to rotate our body. We're trying to get angular speed into the system. And in reference to this conversation, it's about mostly pushing and pulling on the ground. So in the downswing, you probably can't see my
I can see it
here. Can you hear me okay still?
Yeah, I got you.
So I'm a lefty, so maybe that's gonna mess people up. But that front foot, maybe I'll pretend I'm actually. Which way do I look? Am I flipped?
No, do it like you're left-handed.
Okay.
Yeah.
See if I can. If I can just maybe tilt this down a bit, so I think you can see my. Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
There are my force plates.
Yep. Perfect.
On the ground. If I can get that a little bit. We're a little bit. Not super straight, but there we go.
Yep.
So if I'm trying to send the ball in that direction in the downswing, I want to actually be trying to push this lead foot towards the target line in this direction, right? So I want to be applying a force actually down into the ground and out that way. And my back foot, I'm actually trying to pull back behind me. And by doing that, that's going to, if I do those motions, if I try to push this lead foot towards the target line, that's a big part of what's going to create that rotation and get open. And you can see there's actually not a high correlation between hip speed and club speed, because I can actually rotate my hips really fast without generating any ground reaction forces. So right now I'm moving my hips quite quickly while I'm rotating them fast. But you wouldn't see that in the ground. What you can, even though you can have fast hips, it doesn't mean that it's actually creating speed that's going to get out to the club. It's better to be able to push into the ground and have that speed go not just into the hips, but also into the whole body, right? So there's a difference there between just, hey, I can spin my hips around as fast as I want. That's not going to be reflected in the ground, and it's also not going to help me get speed out to the club. I want to get that hip rotation speed from pushing that way into the ground, which is going to drive that leg back up into the pelvis and push it back behind me. It's that pushing and pulling on the ground. That's why LPGA players actually have faster hips than PGA Tour players. But arguably they wouldn't have the same level of ground reaction forces.
Right. And it goes back to, I'll try to bring it full circle now to this changing in knee flex. When I notice when, people turn and they don't lose flexion in that trail knee, right? They just keep it locked in, flexed. They have seems like more the appetite than to kind of launch and push off, like almost like a shot putter, Sasha,
right.
And then, which kind of goes against, like they might launch and spin, but it feels like the interaction with the ground is not as strong, and they get a bit lateral, and then they take on more side bend with the better players. Not the lower, higher handicaps will kind of everything will tend to kind of go ahead. Better players will kind of launch laterally, and then they'll kind of they'll take on more side bend, which reminds me a lot of my swing. Of that, kind of turn the upper, not the lower, a little lateral in the pelvis, decent amount of side bend, not a ton of shaft lean because I tend to carry the extension a little bit, so I kind of let it out a little. Now, as you teach that, kind of more up, right side pelvis higher, you tend to almost get this sensation of kind of sitting a bit, almost sinking into the ground, more pressure into the ground, which then you can use the ground kind of just how you were describing there. Is that accurate to say the parallels of those based off the first discussion we had, which was the changing of knee flex? Yeah.
I think, certainly that a squat into the lead leg, having that lead knee flex increase as the back swing's ending, and just into the start of the downswing to be adding a little bit of flex in that lead knee and then flipping it around, right? So getting that, that's also, getting a stretch in those muscles that doing a little counter move in that lead leg. If we can first add flex, that's going to enable us to generate more force quickly to extend out of it. And extending that lead leg is really important, not only to help us rotate, but also increase that vertical force as well.
Well, I could ask a million more questions on the swing, but I won't. Let me actually, no, I am. I'm going to ask one more here on the swing, and that I'm going to go back to club head speed, because you've designed a device that helps with club head speed. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's right. So I've been working with a lot of tour players over the, past 5 or 6 years on protocols to increase their speed. And one of the things that I would do is I would kind of like just hack my way into being able to adjust weights on their club, lead tape, different things. I had the machine shop guy make a few products, sent one to Jason Day a few years ago, because I want to be able to finally manipulate the weight in the club. And finally I was like, you know what, maybe if I'm trying, this is such a hassle for myself to try and work with players. Wouldn't it be great if I actually had a product that I could use that looked a little bit better than lead tape? So I teamed up with Marty Jertson at Ping.
Yep.
So he designed this. It's called the Stack. He's the engineer behind it. So we've got these different weights that you can slide on, and pairs with an app. So I put my own programming, the same program that I use with tour players, in the app. So you have the hardware, you have the app. It tells you exactly how to train, what weights to put on, how much to rest, tracks your speed.
It's called the Stack.
Called the Stack. TheStackSystem.com.
Nice.
StackSystem.com.
Yeah, go check it out. That's really cool. This is where everything's going. I mean, the speed training, you start adopting some of the things that we're talking about into the swing to create more speed. You're doing this. I mean, you can't help but swing the club faster. I've swung the club as fast as I ever had my entire life right now. I'm 43 years of age, but I'm going about it more educatedly. And one of the big reasons why is a lot of the research that you've done and others. And it's fun. It's a fun time right now for golf. It just seems to be really taking off in so many different ways. And here we are now with the Masters. Spieth wins with his comeback. And I'm really curious, Sasha, to see what the golfer is going to look like in the next 10 to 15 years. I really am. I mean, I sit here and I think to myself, what is that person going to look like? And I think this, back and forth, Humpty Dumpty, I think we're going to be in a different spot. Sure, there's going to be a lot of the same things happening and you got to get the ball in the hole, but in the wave speed creation, I think we're going to see some really interesting and creative things coming in the next 10 to 15 years in the way the tour player looks and plays the game. And we're seeing it with Bryson right now.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see what happens with the change in rules to the equipment if the RA and USGA decide to limit things, because it could have unintended consequences. I mean, maybe we get to keep some of those older courses in rotation. I'm fine with still playing those older courses. I'm going to get worried when people start shooting 40 and 32, and then we can't separate out, who's actually playing better that day. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there's so much wiggle room. I don't really care if everybody goes out and shoots 58. That's going to be exciting, and it's probably not going to happen, right? But so things change it, and who cares if they shoot 58s on some course? It doesn't make it obsolete. It still can be interesting. But I think those rule changes potentially could have unintended consequences, and all of a sudden, now players like Bryson DeChambeau have an even bigger advantage on a lot of courses. So
I think the PGA Tour steps in before we get to that point. I think, as far as some of the rules, we could talk about that for, another hour or so in the rules, but I just think the game right now is cruising way too good.
There's no problem. There's no problem. It is going as good as it's ever been in my career in golf, which has been since I've graduated in college in '99. This is the best I've ever seen the game right now. The best I've ever seen the game. And I say that, and Tiger's not playing, Like that's the way it feels to me. Now I know the PGA Tour hemorrhaged money because they couldn't have fans. I get that they would be like, wait a minute, we got to get some fans back in there. I mean, I understand that, but the fans are coming back. The PGA Tour looks healthy. You look at the LPGA Tour, these American women are playing some good golf right now as well. And I think that's a positive. They're moving in the right direction. I just think recreationally with the amateurs, it just feels really good right now. And the momentum, people coming back to the game. I just don't think you can do anything to it right now. Just don't touch it. Leave it alone. Let's keep moving forward here because we've got great momentum. I mean, we really do. I'm with you.
Yeah. Hey, Sasha, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you at the next training session. And I've learned a ton from you. I thank you and appreciate. I know my audience will love this podcast.